Welcome to the Commanders Declassified podcast, your source for all the Commanders information you can handle and then some. My name is Eric. I'll be hosting tonight. I'm here with my guy Brian and a very special guest, Mr. Brandon Alley from. I don't want to screw this up, Brian. I'm going to let you take it because, this is your thing.
Yeah, it is a very special show. Yes, Brandon Alley of S2 Cognition is here. He is giving us a few minutes of his time. Brandon, how are you, man?
Doing well. Looking forward to Thursday.
Yeah, no, we all are. I think everybody is mock draft out, and they've heard all of the analysis about 1,000 times on different players. So absolutely. Obviously, we wanted to talk to you. You guys have been in the news here in terms of football for your S2 cognition test. Before we get started, just if you could just kind of give us a little bit of background about yourself and the company, because I know there's a lot of football fans who have no idea what S2 is, and they're hearing
Sure.
all about it.
Yeah, sure. So myself personally, I was a college athlete at the University of Tennessee in the early 90s. My other co-founder was also a college athlete, college baseball player at Point Loma University in San Diego. We had very similar, wild but similar career trajectories. So I had a career-ending injury 2 years post-collegiately, where I was trying to see what I could do at the running level. And I elected to choose the longest route possible to put off real life, which was to get a PhD. So I knew that would take me a good solid 7 years, 5 to 7 years. And so that seemed like a reasonable approach. I got my doctorate in clinical neuropsychology and cognitive neuroscience. Went to the Boston area. Got postdoctoral training in cognitive neuroscience at Harvard Medical School and Boston University. Primarily focused on our visual system, how we lay down visual representations. And my area of expertise for the last 15 years prior to that was understanding how those processes operated in healthy brain, but also in diseased aging brain. So when can we pick up very early Alzheimer's disease? Scott took a very similar path, but his area of interest was motor control. So how we start, stop, switch, redirect our motor system. And he was picking up very early movement disorders like Huntington's disease, Parkinson's disease, those kind of things. So we were both in neurosurgery and neurology at Vanderbilt University. That's where we met in 2010. Whether it was for the best or not, we were two PhDs working in a heavily MD focused department, and they put us in an abandoned building that was an old plastic surgery suite. And so we had the whole building to ourselves, which was great. So we had conjoining labs, we had wiffle ball games and a lot of fun. But a lot of that time led to we also had young boys that were coming up in sports. And this is where sort of the nerd in us came out. We, started whiteboarding the visual processes that occur to be able to process 95 miles an hour, at the plate. And then the motor control. So all of that from visual input to motor output needs to occur in less than 4/10 of a second to square one up. And so we diagram this and we diagram football. And I had a great relationship with my strength and conditioning coach in college, Tommy Moffitt, who was at Tennessee, and he won a national title at Miami and then a couple of national titles at LSU. He was still at LSU. And so I just picked up the phone and said, "Hey, Tommy, here's what we're thinking about just to help understand, evaluate athletes from a cognitive perspective. There's ways you can use these athletes based on the way they're wired." So Scott and I didn't invent any of the tests in the S2 battery. We had been using these in the labs, and quite frankly, we were partnering up with neurosurgeons who were actually allowing us to do this in the operating room. As you know, in neurosurgery, patients are awake. And so we were diagramming a lot of the circuitry behind motor control and the interaction between vision and motor control. And so the tasks that we chose to evaluate athletes were very well characterized in the scientific literature, not just from a psychometric standpoint or test retest reliability standpoint, but how do we push them around? ADHD meds, marijuana, alcohol, head injury, all of those sorts of things. We had race-based cultural based. All of those things fit into this package of processes. And so we went and walked into LSU and tried to understand from their coaching perspective, say, what does a defensive back have to do cognitively? What are their most common mental mistakes? And so we built a battery of at the time, I want to say it was 11 different cognitive processes, and we ended up narrowing it down. We spent a couple of years at LSU and the New Orleans Saints, really just fine tuning everything, vetting everything. Does it match with Scout C? All of that kind of stuff. So those are the early goings of it, which led us to where we are today, which is, this is our eighth NFL draft. I know people are just hearing about us now, but this is our eighth NFL draft. We work with about 40 professional teams across 5 different sports. We work with about 60 collegiate programs across 9 sports. We work with special forces, the Navy, Air Force, law enforcement, NASCAR. So the product itself has been around for a while. And let me just classify all of those sports and different verticals all have different batteries of tests based on what they do. So I think, as you guys are too all aware of, every year around this time, medical data gets leaked, Wonderlic scores get leaked. I think we just happen to be at the center of it this year, which sort of brought us to the attention. And people are like, well, what the hell is this S2? Yeah. We've been exclusive, though, I will say that. Up until 2021, we were exclusive to one team in every division, which kind of kept it very small and quiet. We then expanded to 2 teams in every division, which, now you're starting to get half the league. Guys change organizations, and I think there's still sharing of information and that kind of thing. So I think that's why people are now starting to hear about us.
No, that's great, and that's thanks for going through that background, because I know a lot of fans were like, "Wait, where did this come from? What is this? Is this a another Wonderlic?" And very clearly, it is much more advanced and very, very different and focused on that kind of mental processing and how each athlete kind of deals with that process. So that's awesome. Let me ask you something else. Now, obviously, you said you guys have been in the NFL for several years now. I'm curious, when you guys first approached the NFL, or you were first getting into it, was it widely kind of like, hey, yeah, this sounds great, come on in, let's start this? Or were there a lot of the 1980s mindset of, no, we just we're just going to run it in 3
Yeah, that's a great question. Baseball was ready for this. So we started in football, but Major League Baseball took off like wildfire initially. We've been in Major League Baseball since 2013. Again, we have 2 teams in every division there, and they want to keep that exclusive. And just with the analytics in baseball, they were ready for it. It's one position, it's hitter. So being able to understand what we're doing is much easier, whereas football is so dynamic. No 2 plays are ever the same. You've got many positions. We went into it, actually, though, to be quite frank, we went into this to help players. So it was understanding how players are wired, and what you brought up about like Wonderlic and things like that. Those products are out there. Wonderlic, AIQ, they're out there, and they do a great job of characterizing how well is a player going to absorb the playbook? How well is he going to understand complex schemes and things like that? As you climb the levels, that gets vastly more difficult and complicated. But we also thought that scouts did a really good job of going in and talking to the coaches, talking to middle school coaches, getting them to draw stuff on the whiteboard, challenging them, and understanding that. We were interested on execution on the field. So once you are equipped with all of that game knowledge, how do you execute? Because we all know, we've seen it, we see color commentators on TV all the time that, man, they could tell you every situation that's supposed to happen. But when the ball is snapped, different story, right? You've got to execute with precision. So we really took that approach in understanding how an athlete was wired. And what started quickly emerging, particularly at our Division I programs that really get into player development from a true development standpoint. I think the NFL, they coach, but it's a week-to-week kind of coaching, and you're looking for the best talent. There were patterns that were emerging. So, hey, we've got some defensive backs. This is what a true press corner man v man guy looks like. He has these 4 cognitive skills versus a safety or a free or something like that that has to drop back and see the whole field and be patient in his play style. So we were more concerned with making sure players were in the right position, because that not only helped the team, but it helped the player. It helped the player find success. Some of the earliest stories is, we were working with LSU about Deion Jones, who was being used as an outside linebacker. And we had conversation after conversation with Coach Chavis and Jack Marucci about he's wired. I know physically he may not fit the profile, but he's wired for a middle backer. And his senior year, he got that shot at middle backer, and he's kind of shined since then. Yeah. And we've done that with some defensive backs. So that's really where we were. It wasn't until the scouts started coming into LSU and asking about players, and Coach Miles at the time, Coach Cam Cameron at the time, Marucci, Dave Aranda were saying, hey, this S2 stuff, you need to look into it, because I think if you're looking, because when we go into draft meetings now, that's the first question that's always asked. What is the role for this particular player? As you know, there can be 17 styles of defensive back. So what are you asking this defensive back to do? And so they relayed that to the NFL teams. Well, the NFL teams immediately just saw this as selection, right? And so, but it's informed selection. And I would not have a big enough ego to sit here and tell you that we're a ginormous piece of the puzzle. We are one piece of the puzzle in their scouting department that they're using to try to reduce the uncertainty. Right. And so if you've got a little bit more information about how this athlete processes information, you're just reducing uncertainty. And so that's how it kind of spun into the NFL. And I think, in the media the last few weeks or whatever, we are getting heavily, heavily pounded as a selection tool, as a yes, no tool, as a draft or not draft tool. And that's not really why we're in this, nor is that how it works with our teams.
No, yeah, that was kind of one of my questions that I had for you is how do we guard against this becoming, like we've seen this week, not to mention any specific player, but we've seen a lot of talk this week about some of the scores that leaked and what it's doing to draft stock. It seems to me like, how do we guard against this becoming the end all be all of what? I mean, I feel like that may be more of a media thing than an actual NFL thing, but you probably have more insight into that than I do. Is that a concern for you guys moving forward, or how do we guard against that?
Well, the leaks are concerns. I mean, the leaks are concerns for 2 major reasons for me. One is I have half of the NFL paying for a certain level of exclusivity. So when those leaks get out, it's no longer exclusive. The second is that it's damaging to a player. You're talking about a 21, 22-year-old kid who's worked his entire life to get to this point. And you're going to bring one number completely out of context and make a narrative around that. It's just morally irreprehensible for me. I just can't wrap my head around that. The piece, though, that is concerning is that, as I've said on Pat McAfee and another show earlier today, 2 of those scores had 0 context. They were incorrect. And they were incorrect for a certain reason. As I started this off, we're very athlete-centric. We want to make sure the athlete puts their best foot forward. That's not always the case for these guys when they're completely overwhelmed by the draft process, and it's not their fault. So when your flight comes in late, you haven't eaten for 8 hours, you're in an interview, then you're shoved in our face at 11 p.m. when you've gotten there at 6 a.m. to do a pretty demanding cognitive test. It's just not fair to the athlete. We tell them that it's not fair and that we will retest you. We will find a place to retest you, whether it's a 30 visit, go to your facility, go to your pro day. And that happens quite frequently. So as an example, we tested about 855 players for this year's draft. I would say about 22 of them needed to be retested for those exact reasons. And so I just don't think it's fair. I think that, there's been one of the scores was just wrong, and I don't know why it was wrong, but one of them was clearly a first take. And we knew that athlete needed to have a second take. And that athlete did significantly better on the second take. So I just think that you have to have context. And as Brian sort of alluded to a little bit here, the one number is also damning. It's damaging because you don't have the full picture. Like we spend hours in draft rooms explaining a profile. You've got 9 different cognitive scores. So let's say you've got a quarterback who's at the you see a 90. He scored at the 90th percentile. That same very quarterback could have a 5 on what we call tracking capacity, which is his ability to broaden his attention and see the whole field. So to keep track of many moving objects in space, maybe to make reads from one sideline to the other. Well, is that damning? I don't know, but if that's what your offensive scheme requires, then it can be damning, right? Even though he's a 90, if you're going to ask your guy to make reads across the field and he's got a little bit of tunnel vision, that becomes problematic. So you don't have the context around the 90. We have plenty of athletes, and again, I want to make this clear too, 50 is average on our test. So if you're at the 50th, you are dead average. The media around there is 40 to 60. So if you score in that 40 to 60 range, that is an average score. An average score for the top 3% of all college football players. So it's not the top, it's not average compared to the dudes on the street, right? I mean, these guys are all elite brains. It's average for the top 3% of players. And so when you may see a guy who scores 60, and you're like, well, that doesn't sound good, especially after I've seen so-and-so was leaked at a 95. Well, my guy could have the 4 key characteristics that you need at wide receiver. He may be at the 95th percentile at the 4 characteristics that we know make successful receivers. So you don't get the full picture. So these leaks are just, not only are they inappropriate because you can hurt a kid, but you don't have the full picture of what these athletes are capable of.
No, that's excellent. That puts into context and gives a much better, more rational perspective of these numbers and kind of the value you can get from them, and then kind of some of the downside of the media like that. But I'm excited about it. I really like what you guys are doing. Let me ask you this: is it mainly programs like a college program or a professional programs that are coming to you? Because I can see, hey, if I've got a kid who is a high level athlete from a high school age, I could say, you know what, this is something we want to get them in early and start doing this to work on it. Hey, we get trainers to work on our body, then we need trainers to kind of work on the mental side of these sports. Are you guys seeing any of that, or is it still just, hey, these professional teams are reaching out, or college teams?
Yeah, no. So we have to have the infrastructure and the ability to support those athletes. Again, we're not just a data service where we just drop you with a bunch of numbers. We want to be able to help work with that athlete and train that athlete. We actually had a 15-year pro, 7-year MLB catcher, Paul Phillips, leave the Marlins organization to come and work with us full time. Oh, wow. And so Paul has actually worked with pro hitting coaches. Joe Dillon, the hitting coach for the Nationals when they won the World Series, spent a summer with us, and we actually developed very specific drills for youth baseball. So youth baseball, we have 4 cognitive processes that are important. It's what pitch it is, so perception speed. It's trajectory, predicting where something will land in space, so where it'll cross the plate. It's when to swing, right? That's the main objective of a pitcher, is to change timing, so learning timing adjustments. And then whether to swing, so to control that impulse for a high heater just out of the zone or a slider in the dirt. So we took the framework of what we know to move performance that's in the cognitive science literature and worked with these coaches to say, hey, can we build cognitively informed drills? Now, those drills are being used at the major league level. I don't know if you saw this. If you went on our website, Austin Nola, the San Diego Padres catcher, has improved his performance significantly with these drills. But we have those now packaged up that youth players, we usually start around 12 to 18, can continuously work on to get better on those on-field metrics. Not taking our test. We don't want to get them better on the test.
Sure.
We want to get them better on the field. At the college level is really interesting because there's a lot of R&D. So we do drill work, but we also do things like, hey, you know what? We're not great at predicting on-field performance at defensive line and offensive line. Let's dig into that a little bit. What are we missing? What are these athletes doing that we're not capturing? So, we've learned through working with the offensive line coach at Vanderbilt. These guys have to know a lot about angles. They've got to judge angles. They've got to know about leverage. They got to have a cadence to what they're doing. We have tests for that. As a matter of fact, they're in the field goal kicker battery, but we've got to be able to do that, and at the college level, we can do that. We can put eye tracking goggles to make sure defensive backs are looking right where they need to be, to make sure receivers or their dominant eye is facing the route. All of those kinds of things are done to develop athletes at the college level, and that's one of the funnest experiences. That 2019 LSU team, that team was wired up from a cognitive perspective and a brain hardware perspective.
No, that's awesome, and I mean, you clearly saw that LSU team, what they did on the field, so that's excellent. Are you guys, I guess at this point now, right? Everybody knows who you are in a quick, short amount of time. But are you guys going to like some of these football conferences or symposiums where they're talking about schemes or new techniques and tactics and talking about S2, or is this something? Hey, we just get certain people who contact us and we kind of work with them individually, or how do you get to work with LSU?
Yeah, so obviously LSU is a personal relationship of mine. My ex strength and conditioning coach, and being a college athlete at a high level in the SEC, I still maintain a lot of connections and friends and things like that, which has certainly opened some doors. And Paul Phillips, who left the Marlins, clearly has a lot of major league connections. But we have never wanted to expand this business at a pace that we couldn't handle. Like, our major thing is having those relationships, because it's those dialogues that move us and performance forward. So having those relationships and those synergistic dialogues with coaches, we try to marry high level science. So we have scientists that we've worked with, we consult with all the time, that really study these cognitive processes, and we have these elite coaches. So being able to translate and marry those two fields really is advancing things. So we never went out there. We don't have a sales department. We don't sell. We don't have promotional materials. I literally January 1 took the role of chief marketing officer, only because I know the product very well and I'm interested in putting some of our content in a palatable. If I wrote like an academic, nobody's going to read it. So I'm trying to take content that we get, data that we get, and put it in a palatable format. So somebody like yourself is like, "Hey, I'm interested in this. Let me go read about it."
Yeah.
So if you're thinking that if our marketing department is relying on me, that says a lot about where we are from that perspective. So mainly everything comes from word of mouth. And so, yeah, again, this has shot us in a stratosphere that we're not ready to go to right away, but we're taking it as it comes. We're learning a lot and trying our best.
So
No, that's
working with professional teams. Is this you said you've expanded out to half the league now? Is this like a year-to-year thing where you bring guys back in after a year of, or however long of doing the drills, you bring them back in, you retest them, and and do you continue to tailor the drills around what they're picking up or not picking up? So I'm assuming this is just an ever evolving tool. It's not going to be the same S2 test in 10 years that it is now.
That's right. We do that significantly at the college level. I gotta be honest here. We're 90% on the selection side of things in pro sports. We do some player development. Now, say it depends on the sport, right? We do a lot of player development in pro baseball because there's a 5-year minor league system that's all their job is to develop. We've worked with a handful of G League teams, just really helping them refine the drills that they do in practice to become more efficient in their decision making. We kind of leave the evaluation alone once we understand how an athlete is wired. And again, I think this is a probably important point I should have started with. We evaluate at the systems level. Okay. And so when I talk about the systems level, let's just take impulse as an example. We take classic literature tests to evaluate your impulse control system. It is the system that when you're sitting at a red light and the turn lane is next to you and the arrow turns green, you hit the gas and then you hit the brake, right? You got to impulsively do that. somebody says something smart to you in the grocery store or road rage, you control that impulse to punch somebody or to go out all out road rage. It is the same system that keeps you from swinging at sliders in the dirt. It's the same system that keeps you from jumping off sides on a hard count or throwing an interception on a partial read or jumping on a pump fake. So we test the system, and that's where I think the business actually is there's plenty of people that can test the system. We translate that into how we feel like performance will be affected by that, by position on the field, those kind of things. And then you cannot train at the systems level. This is where all the brain game, we saw an explosion of brain game apps a decade ago that we don't see anymore. I mean, there's still some out there, and I as an aging researcher at one point, think that there's a lot of value for aging adults to stay sort of mentally fit. But let's say you yourself needed to work on better working memory to do your job. Like, I got to remember more stuff, so when I go on air, I can talk about it, right? Well, if you did the Lumosity working memory game, what would happen is your score on Lumosity, you would get better and better at that game, but it lacks transfer. We call that transfer. So you would have difficulty. You wouldn't be able to remember more in your everyday to day life. You'd still need to write a list if somebody asked you to get 7 items at the grocery store, even though you could get 9 things on the Lumosity. So we know that the training the systems level or taking our evaluation a bunch to get better at the systems level may incrementally move it. It is not going to make a difference on the field. So you've got to practice that context on the field. And so to give an example of that, we were talking about baseball. We developed, we went to a Division I baseball program and a high-level high school or travel bowl program. And we said, hey, what's your biggest chase pitch? And they were like, before, high heater, right out of the zone. We just can't lay off of it. We gave them a pre-planned sequence where half of the pitches were right out of the zone, half of the pitches were in the zone, and we charted their chase rates. It kind of linked up with the impulse control score. Then what we did was we did a 4-week and 8-week drill plan where we systematically made them lay off of that pitch. We train them to lay off of that pitch. We reduced their chase rates from 53%. I know that's really high. That's not a normal chase rate, but we made the drill hard. We lowered it all the way to about 18%.
Wow.
So that is a significant thing. Their score on the impulse control task on our test, probably not much better. But in the cage for that specific pitch, it is much better.
Right.
Here's also what we learned, which makes things tricky. Their proclivity to swing at sliders in the dirt wasn't much better. So it was specific to that pitch, right? And that just goes to show you how hard it is to sort of move the needle in these processes, but it's got to be it's got to mimic game. It's got to be close to game speed and as game-like as possible.
So you don't shock them with electricity as a deterrent. That's old. That's too old school. That's the way I would do it. That's how my coach did it.
That has been done.
I'm a fan of this stuff. I'm a fan of anything that we can do to kind of gain a competitive advantage. However, technology or new practices kind of take us, I'm all for it. I mean, I don't like the, this is the same way we've been doing it for 50 years type of mindset. So I really like what you guys are doing here. And then I guess with the sports that you have now is, I know you mentioned a couple of them, football, baseball. What other ones are we missing that you guys are also kind of working with sports wise?
Yep. Basketball, hockey, soccer, lacrosse, volleyball, golf.
Any swimmer? Any swimming? I have a young competitive swimmer as a daughter, so.
No, we don't actually work with swimming and track and field. There's just not a lot of cognitive processing. There is reaction time stuff based, right? But what's interesting, and Scott, my business partner, has studied this for a very long time, and we actually just have a podcast we released yesterday on this with an expert from Northern Colorado that studies athlete reaction time. Dr. Ted Bayshore, who's a really interesting cat. I think it's interesting just to listen to him because he was the youngest starting linebacker at UCLA in history, and I think still may be. As a 17-year-old, he was a dual sport athlete, baseball and football at UCLA, and then had a 5-year stint with the Braves. And when he retired, he started studying reaction time for athletes. And really what they're finding is basic, simple reaction time. So just you see a stimulus and you respond is not disclosing between athletes and just average Joes. If you add any type of conflict, like respond as quickly as you can if it goes to the right but not the left, athletes are much quicker. Or respond if it's blue versus orange, athletes are much quicker. Or if you have to make a judgment on some, athletes are much quicker. But a simple reaction time, like a track and field or a swimming athlete, I think you can see some kids who react better than the gun than others, but statistically there's no difference. And that's why they've applied. I'm a track guy. I don't know if they've done this in swimming, but in track now they have pressurized starting blocks. And I don't know if you know Devin Allen in that story where he was disqualified in the Olympics because
Yes.
they won't let you leave the blocks within 1/100th of a second from the gun because they don't think it's humanly possible to do that. That goes to show you that there's not a lot of variability. They're saying nobody can do that, that you're guessing if you're responding that fast. So they've kind of put some bumpers around that in some of those sports. But, some of the wildest stuff that we've encountered is when under conflict. So when we put your motor system under conflict, athletes are just wired to respond super quick. Where guys like me who are not elite ball sport athletes I struggle with conflict. Right. If I'm to respond in the opposite direction of something as quickly as I can, I'm just not as good as if I have to respond in the same direction. These athletes have no difficulty, whether it's mirroring an opponent or going the opposite direction of an opponent.
No, that's awesome. One last question, and we'll get you out of here because you've been awesome in answering our questions. Obviously with the draft here, you've been a celebrity here. You've been on probably 30 or 40 shows talking. Was this part of your was this something that you thought about? Like, man, I'm gonna have to go on all these shows and talk about the product at all. Like, how's that been these last couple?
Not
of
at all. Was not remotely on my bingo card at all. I mean, again, this is our 8th draft, and literally nobody has heard of us outside of the teams that we work with and a couple of other people in the space. I want to say perhaps Justin Fields' score might have gotten talked about his draft year. And we saw a little bit of this coming because of Brock Purdy. That story kind of spun off because Brock's quarterback coach is a good friend of ours that we do a lot of developmental work with. We actually tested Kirk Herbstreit's son, who also trains with Will Hewlett down in Jacksonville. And Will was just in conversation with the athletic reporter one day, Matt Barrows, and was like, not only is Brock a good kid and listens and is coachable, but his S2 score is off the charts. And Barrow was like, well, what is this S2? And so there was an article written about us probably a week before the combine that kind of put us a little bit out there. I mean, we got a couple of hits on that kind of stuff, but it hasn't really been until the last 2 weeks. And so I just thought it was really important, one, for us to have our own narrative, because obviously which I'm sure you guys are witnesses to, if you've ever been on Twitter, it is the Wild West when it comes to sports and pro sports. And so the narrative was getting spun out of control about that we were the next Wonderlic, or this is what we do and what we don't do, and that we leak scores, or that agents have access to scores and they should be reporting them. And none of that is true. And so we needed to go on and talk about our own media. And then again, I felt obligated as a responsible human being to say, hey, hang on.
Yeah.
There's been a download of scores here with no context, and 2 of them are inaccurate. I feel a little bit of obligation we're talking about kids again who are just kids. I mean, some people may not see it that way, but these young men are just coming out of college. Some of them just 3 years out of college, who have literally worked their ass off for a really long time to get in the position, and something that me and Scott created are now part of a dialogue of that this kid's never going to make it. It's like, first off, we would never say,
Right.
S2 is going to determine the next Tom Brady or the next Ryan Leaf, right? I mean, that's not our business. Our business is help informing coaches and athletes and reducing risks, right? If we could tell you, hey, if you score an 85 on the S2, there's a 50% chance you're going to make it. Or if you score a 20 on S2, there's a 5% chance you're going to make it. We're not telling you a 20 is never going to make it and an 80 is going to make it. We're just telling you, hey, let's play the odds here. What are the probabilities? And just trying to be supportive in that way.
No, that's excellent. And Brandon, thank you so much for coming on the show, kind of explaining the history of S2, your company, how you guys came to put everything together and the work that you guys are doing. I think it's awesome. I think it's very next level, and I can't wait to kind of see what you guys continue to do here. So thank you very much. We appreciate it. Eric, do you have any last things?
Yeah, I might hit you guys up about golf because I just came from the golf course and I stunk it up today. So I need some help. So
Yeah.
I need you to tell me why I suck.
We do a lot of golf. Yeah, that's fun. Well, I appreciate you
also
guys having
learned.
me on.
Oh, I
Go ahead.
apologize. I was just saying I
No,
also
go ahead.
learned that people are awake during brain surgery, and that's kind of terrifying. I actually didn't know that. So I hope I never have to
Yes,
have brain surgery.
it's the one organ in the body that does not have pain receptors. So you can cut away up there and you don't feel it. And we do that so that we're assuring when we're putting depth electrodes or we're putting anything in the brain, we can see the consequences immediately. So if we're affecting speech, we're expecting vision or motor movement or whatever, we can get at that right away to know that we're in the right place.
That is crazy.
That's how neurosurgery works. Yeah.
Yeah. You still got to get
So
to the brain though. So you got to hack off the top of the head. So
yeah, I'm
I'm
not
pretty
part
sure
of
there's
that.
pain
So I
receptacles
come
there.
in.
Yeah.
I come in when all that stuff has been done. Yeah.
Yeah, that'll be on the next podcast, neurosurgery declassified. We'll get into that topic there. But Brandon, thank
I
you.
love it.
The website is s2cognition.com. Go check them out.
Yep.
Check out Brandon because he's been on every show talking about the S2 cognition test. So we thank you. We appreciate it, man. Thank you.
Yeah, sure. Thanks for having us and follow us on social. We update frequently with different guests that we have, different data dumps and podcasts and blogs. So
You want to give out the socials, what those are?
yeah, so on Twitter it's just at S2Cognition, and on Instagram it's at S2.cognition.
At S2 Cognition on Twitter and Instagram. What was it one more time?
At S2.cognition.
There it is, Brandon Alley of S2 Cognition. Everybody, thank you.
Thanks, guys. Appreciate you having me on.